The gunshot that shattered the stagecoach window was the last thing Eleanor Hartwell heard before rough hands dragged her into the suffocating darkness of a burlap sack. And when she finally saw daylight again 3 days later, her wrists were raw and bleeding from the ropes that had bound her to a wooden post in an abandoned mining camp somewhere in the New Mexico territory. It was August of 1878, and the heat was merciless. Eleanor had been traveling from Santa Fe to her uncle's ranch in Silver City when the outlaws attacked. She remembered the driver's cry, the thundering of hooves, and then nothing but terror and darkness. The men who took her were part of the Dalton Gang, a group of ruthless criminals who had been terrorizing the territory for months. They wanted ransom from her uncle, a wealthy cattle baron, but their messenger had not returned, and the outlaws were growing impatient and mean. On the 4th day of her captivity, Eleanor heard shouting, then more gunshots. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the shack where they kept her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The ropes around her wrists had rubbed the skin raw, and every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her arms. She could feel the wetness of blood mixing with sweat, making the binding slick. The door burst open. A man stood silhouetted against the bright sunlight, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rifle in his hands. For a terrible moment, Eleanor thought he was another outlaw, but then he lowered the weapon and stepped inside. His eyes found hers in the dimness, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Concern, genuine, deep concern. "Are you Eleanor Hartwell?" His voice was rough, weathered like old leather, but there was gentleness beneath it. She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked from days without enough water. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and knelt beside her. "My name is James Cordell. Your uncle hired me to find you. You are safe now. I promise you that." His hands moved to the ropes at her wrists, and Eleanor flinched involuntarily. James froze, his dark eyes meeting hers again. "I am going to cut these ropes, miss. I will be as careful as I can." She nodded again, and he pulled a knife from his belt. The blade was sharp, and he worked with steady precision, sawing through the thick hemp. When the ropes finally fell away, Eleanor gasped. The sudden release of pressure was almost as painful as the binding had been. She tried to lower her arms, but they were stiff and unresponsive. James caught her hands gently, supporting them as he examined her wrists. His jaw tightened when he saw the extent of the damage. The skin was rubbed away in places, leaving raw, bleeding wounds. Dark bruises ringed both wrists where the rope had cut off circulation. "Those bastards," he muttered, and there was real anger in his voice. Then he looked at her face again, and his expression softened. "I need to tend to these. Can you wait just a moment?" Eleanor managed to find her voice. "Where are they? The outlaws?" "3 are dead. 2 ran off. They would not be coming back." He stood and walked to the door, scanning the area outside before returning with saddlebags. From them he pulled a canteen and a clean cloth. "Drink first. Slow sips." The water was the most wonderful thing Eleanor had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but James was right to caution her. She drank carefully, feeling life returning to her parched body with each swallow. James soaked the cloth with water and then looked at her. "This is going to hurt. I am sorry." He was right. When he began cleaning the wounds on her wrists, Eleanor had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. But his touch was incredibly gentle, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he washed away the dried blood and dirt. He worked in silence, his concentration complete, and Eleanor found herself studying his face. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-darkened skin and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into bright horizons. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung to his collar. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "You are a tracker?" she asked, needing to hear a human voice that was not cruel or threatening. "Among other things, I scout sometimes, guide wagon trains, track down lost cattle or horses. He finished cleaning one wrist and started on the other. Your uncle was frantic when you did not arrive. He knew something had gone wrong. He came to me because I know this territory better than most. How did you find me? Followed the trail from where they hit your stage. It was not easy. They split up, doubled back, tried to hide their tracks. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. He pulled a small tin from his saddlebag and opened it. The salve inside smelled of herbs and beeswax. This will help with the healing. My mother taught me how to make it. She learned from the Navajo people who live in these lands. He applied the salve with the same gentle care, his fingers barely touching her damaged skin. Then he tore strips from a clean shirt in his saddlebag and began wrapping her wrists with expert precision. Not too tight, but secure enough to protect the wounds. There, he said when he finished. That should help. We will need to change the bandages every day until the wounds close. We? Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. James looked at her, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. The journey back to your uncle's ranch will take 3 days. I am not leaving you alone out here, Miss Hartwell, not for 1 second. I made a promise to keep you safe, and I mean to keep it. Something about the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made Eleanor feel truly safe for the first time since the attack. She realized she was trembling, reaction finally setting in now that the immediate danger had passed. James noticed immediately. He shrugged out of his leather vest and draped it around her shoulders, even though the temperature inside the shack must have been close to 100 degrees. The shaking will pass, he said quietly. It is just your body understanding that the danger is over. Is it? Eleanor heard the shakiness in her own voice. You said 2 of them got away. They ran like scared rabbits, and they will keep running. They know that anyone who comes after you now is going to die. The certainty in his voice was absolute. But we should not stay here. Can you ride? Eleanor nodded. She had been riding since childhood. James helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs proved unsteady. He moved slowly, giving her time to adjust, never rushing her. Outside, the sunlight was blinding after days in the dim shack. Eleanor squinted against it, raising one bandaged hand to shade her eyes. The scene before her was grim. 2 bodies lay in the dirt, and buzzards were already circling overhead. James steered her away from them toward where 3 horses stood tied to a scraggly tree. One was a magnificent bay stallion, clearly his mount. The other 2 must have belonged to the outlaws. We will take all 3, James said. The extra horse can carry supplies, and we can sell the others in Silver City. Consider it partial payment for what those men put you through. He helped her mount the smaller of the 2 outlaw horses, a sturdy pinto mare that seemed calm and well-trained. Eleanor settled into the saddle with relief. Despite everything, this felt normal, familiar. James tied the 3rd horse to his saddle and then mounted the bay with easy grace. We will ride until dusk, he said. There is a good camping spot about 15 miles from here near a creek. You can wash properly there, and I will make us a decent meal. Do you think you can manage that distance? Yes, Eleanor said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. Something about James Cordell's presence made her feel stronger than she had any right to feel. They rode. The landscape of New Mexico territory spread around them in shades of tan and rust and gold, dotted with scrub brush and occasional stands of juniper. Mountains rose in the distance, hazy with heat. James set a steady pace, not too fast, but not dawdling either. Every so often he would glance back at Eleanor, checking on her without making a show of it. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself watching him. The way he sat his horse, easy and relaxed, but alert to everything around them. The way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, missing nothing. He was clearly a man accustomed to danger, comfortable in wild places. But there was nothing threatening about him. If anything, Eleanor felt safer with every mile they traveled together. When the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James led them off the main trail toward a line of cottonwood trees. The sound of running water reached Eleanor's ears, and she nearly wept with relief. The creek was shallow but clear, burbling over smooth stones. James dismounted and came to help her down. Eleanor's legs were shaky again, this time from hours in the saddle after days of inactivity. She would have fallen if James had not caught her, his arms strong and steady around her waist. "Easy," he murmured. "Give yourself a moment." They stood like that, closer than propriety would normally allow, and Eleanor became acutely aware of several things at once. The warmth of his body, the smell of leather and horse, and something else, something clean and masculine that was just him, the way his hands spanned her waist, strong but careful, as if she were something precious that might break. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then James cleared his throat and stepped back, releasing her carefully. "I will tend to the horses," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "The creek is all yours. There are clean clothes in my saddlebag, a shirt and trousers that should fit you well enough. They will be more comfortable than that torn dress." Eleanor looked down at herself. She had not really registered the state of her clothing. Her traveling dress was ripped, filthy, and stained with blood. The idea of clean clothes, of washing away days of fear and captivity, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said softly. James nodded and turned away, busying himself with the horses. Eleanor took the clothes he had indicated and walked upstream, around a bend that would give her privacy. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the air was finally beginning to cool. She undressed slowly, her movements stiff and painful. When she stepped into the creek, the cold water made her gasp, but it felt glorious against her overheated skin. She scrubbed herself as best she could, careful around her injured wrists, washing away layers of grime and fear. The clean shirt and trousers James had given her were too large, but she rolled up the sleeves and cuffs and cinched the belt tight. They smelled like him, that clean, masculine scent, and wearing them felt strangely intimate. When she returned to camp, James had a fire going and was working on preparing a meal. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her in his clothes, but he said nothing about it. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Eleanor said, and meant it. She felt almost human again. "Sit." James indicated a spot near the fire where he had spread a blanket. "Food will be ready soon." Eleanor sat, tucking her legs beneath her. She watched as James worked, efficient and competent. He had coffee brewing in a battered pot and was frying salt pork and beans in a skillet. It was simple fare, but her stomach growled at the smell. "How long have you lived in the territory?" she asked. "Most of my life. My father came out here in '58, right after the gold rush in Colorado. He had dreams of striking it rich." James smiled, but there was sadness in it. Never found much gold, but he fell in love with the land. Built a small ranch, raised cattle. He died 6 years ago. My mother followed him 2 years later. I sold the ranch after that. Too many memories, and I was not ready to settle down. "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "About your parents." "Thank you." He handed her a tin plate piled with food and a fork. "What about you? What brings a lady from back east all the way out here?" "How did you know I was from back east?" James smiled. "Your accent, the way you carry yourself, and your uncle mentioned you were coming from Philadelphia." Eleanor nodded, taking a bite of the food. It was delicious, or maybe she was just starving. "I grew up in Philadelphia, yes. My parents died of typhoid 3 years ago. I have been living with my aunt since then, but she remarried last year, and her new husband made it clear I was not welcome. My uncle wrote and invited me to come live with him and his wife. He said the West was a place where people could start fresh." "It is that," James agreed, "though it can be a hard place too. Unforgiving." "I noticed," Eleanor said dryly, holding up her bandaged wrists. James's expression darkened. "That should not have happened to you. If I had been hired sooner, if I had tracked them faster—" "You saved my life," Eleanor interrupted. Those men were getting angrier by the day. I heard them talking about just killing me and leaving my body for the coyotes. You found me in time, and I will be forever grateful for that. Their eyes met across the fire. The sun had set completely now, and the flames cast dancing shadows across James's face. There was something in his gaze that made Eleanor's breath catch, an intensity that had nothing to do with the rescue and everything to do with the two of them, here now. James looked away first, turning his attention to his own food. They ate in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence. When they finished, Eleanor helped him clean the dishes in the creek. The night air was cool now, a welcome relief from the day's heat. Stars were beginning to emerge overhead, more stars than Eleanor had ever seen in her life. It is beautiful, she breathed, staring up at the vast expanse of sky. One of the things I love about the West, James said. He was standing close to her again, she realized. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. In towns and cities, you lose this. Too many lights, too many buildings. Out here, you remember how small you are, how big the world is. I have never seen anything like it, Eleanor admitted. There is more to see. Wait until we cross through the canyon country tomorrow, rock formations that look like they were carved by giants, colors in the stone you would not believe. You love it here, Eleanor observed. I do, James said simply. It is in my blood now. I could not imagine living anywhere else. They stood together watching the stars emerge one by one. Eleanor felt something shifting inside her, something she could not quite name. This man, this stranger who had saved her life, felt like someone she had known forever. There was an ease between them that should not have been possible after less than a day. We should get some rest, James said finally. I want to start at first light. He had set up a simple camp, 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Eleanor's was the nicer of the two, she noticed, with extra blankets. James caught her looking. You take the good one, he said. I have slept on worse than bare ground. I cannot take your bedroll, Eleanor protested. You can, and you will. There was no room for argument in his tone. You have been through hell, Miss Hartwell. Let me make what I can of it easier. Eleanor wanted to argue more, but exhaustion was crashing over her like a wave. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, leaving only bone-deep weariness. She lay down on the bedroll, and James covered her with the blankets despite the warm night. Sleep, he said gently. I will keep watch. You need to rest too, Eleanor murmured, her eyes already closing. I will, but I'm going to make sure we are safe first. The last thing Eleanor saw before sleep claimed her was James sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, his silhouette strong and reassuring against the starlit sky. She woke once in the deepest part of night to find him still there, still watching. When their eyes met across the dying fire, he gave her a small nod, a silent reassurance. Eleanor drifted back to sleep, feeling safer than she had in years. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. James was already up, dressed, and cooking breakfast. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her stirring. Morning, he said. How are your wrists? Eleanor examined them. They were sore, but the pain was less sharp than yesterday. Better, I think. Good. Let me change those bandages after breakfast. They ate quickly, both eager to be on their way. When James unwrapped her wrist to check the wounds, Eleanor was relieved to see them looking cleaner, less angry. He applied more salve and fresh bandages with the same gentle care as before. You would make a good doctor, Eleanor said. James chuckled. I will stick to tracking, thanks. Though I have patched up enough men and animals over the years, you learn these things out here. Sometimes you are days from the nearest town, and you cannot afford to wait for proper help. They mounted up and rode out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. True to James's promise, the landscape became more dramatic as they traveled. They entered a region of towering red rock formations carved by wind and water into fantastic shapes. Eleanor found herself gasping at the beauty of it, craning her neck to take it all in. James watched her with obvious pleasure. "Worth the journey?" he asked. "Oh, yes," Eleanor breathed. "I have never seen anything so magnificent. Wait until you see the sunset here. The rocks turn colors you would not think possible, crimson and gold and purple all at once. Will we be camping here tonight? If you would like, we can push on towards Silver City, or we can take our time. Your uncle knows you are safe. I sent word with a rider I met yesterday before I found you. He will understand if we are a few extra days." Eleanor thought about it. Part of her wanted to reach safety, to be surrounded by civilization again, but another part of her, a part she was only beginning to recognize, wanted these days with James to last. Out here, it was just the two of them and the vast landscape. No social rules, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. "Let us see the sunset," she said. James's smile made her heart skip. "I was hoping you would say that." They rode through country that seemed almost otherworldly. Massive rock formations rose around them like the walls of ancient cathedrals. James pointed out landmarks, told her stories of the people who had lived here before white settlers came. The Pueblo peoples, the Apache, the Navajo. He spoke of them with respect, acknowledging the injustices they had suffered as more and more settlers pushed into their lands. "My mother's mother was half Navajo," James told her, as they stopped to water the horses at a spring. "That is where I learned about the land, about tracking, about plants that heal. She taught my mother, and my mother taught me. I am grateful for that knowledge every day." "Is that why you are so comfortable out here?" Eleanor asked. "You move through this land like you are part of it?" "I suppose I am, in a way." James looked out at the red rocks rising around them. "The land is not something to fight against. You have to learn to work with it, respect it. Too many people come out here thinking they can just take what they want, bend the wilderness to their will. That is how people die, or end up destroyed by this place." "You sound like a philosopher," Eleanor said, smiling. James laughed. "Never been called that before. Mostly people call me a half-breed or a drifter, depending on how polite they are feeling." Eleanor felt a flash of anger at that. "People are cruel." "They are," James agreed. "But their opinions do not matter much to me anymore. I know who I am. That is enough." They rode on, falling into an easy rhythm of conversation punctuated by comfortable silences. Eleanor found herself telling James things she had never told anyone. About how lonely she had felt after her parents died, like she was just going through the motions of living without really being alive. About her aunt's husband, who had looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. About her hopes for a new start in New Mexico, her fears that she would never really belong anywhere. James listened to all of it, really listened, without interrupting or trying to fix things. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "I understand that feeling," he said, "of not belonging. I am too white for the Navajo people, too Indian for the white settlers. I've spent most of my life in between, not fitting anywhere. But I have learned that belonging is not about other people accepting you. It is about accepting yourself. Finding people who see you for who you are and value that." "Have you found those people?" Eleanor asked. James glanced at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I think I might be starting to." Eleanor's heart fluttered at that, at the implication in his words. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge what was growing between them, but she could not find the words. Instead, she just smiled at him, and he smiled back, and that felt like enough for now. As the afternoon wore on, James led them to a sheltered canyon where a natural spring created a small pool of crystal-clear water. The rock walls rose high on three sides, creating a protected space that felt almost sacred. Petroglyphs covered parts of the rock face, ancient symbols and images left by people who had lived here hundreds or thousands of years ago. "This is sacred ground," James said as they dismounted. "The Pueblo people use this place for ceremonies. I camp here sometimes when I am in the area. It feels peaceful." Eleanor could feel it too, a sense of timelessness and tranquility that settled over her like a blanket. They tended to the horses and set up camp. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the rocks were indeed starting to change color just as James had promised. While James prepared their evening meal, Eleanor sat on a flat rock near the pool, dangling her feet in the cool water. She watched the play of light on the rock walls, the way the colors shifted and deepened. It was mesmerizing, almost magical. James came to sit beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He gave her one, and they sat in companionable silence, sipping the hot, strong brew. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "For the coffee? For everything. For saving me. For being kind when you could have just delivered me to my uncle and been done with it. For showing me these beautiful places. For listening." She paused, gathering courage. "For making me feel like myself again." James set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were very dark, very intense. "Eleanor," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding. "What?" "I've been alone for a long time. By choice, mostly. It was easier that way, not getting attached to anyone or anything except the land. But these past 2 days with you have been different. You are different." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, carefully avoiding her bandaged wrist. "I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I need you to know that what I'm feeling right now is real." Eleanor could barely breathe. "What are you feeling?" "Like I've been walking in the dark for years and suddenly someone lit a lamp." His hand tightened on hers, "like maybe I've been looking for you without knowing it." "James," Eleanor whispered. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "I feel it too. I thought I was imagining it, or that it was just gratitude because you saved my life. But it is more than that." "It is more than that," James agreed. He lifted his other hand to her face, cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made her want to cry. "Eleanor Hartwell, I know I'm not what your family would choose for you. I am a half-breed drifter with no property and no prospects. But I swear to you, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day making sure you know how precious you are." Eleanor leaned into his touch. "I do not care what my family thinks. I care what I think. And I think you are the most genuine, kindest, strongest man I have ever met." James's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or hesitation. He must not have found any, because he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him. Eleanor closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then James's hand slid into her hair, and Eleanor's wrapped around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable, like gravity or sunrise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I was not expecting you," he said with a soft laugh. "I was just supposed to find you and bring you home safe." "You did bring me home," Eleanor said. "Maybe not the home I thought I was going to, but home nonetheless. Because being with you feels like coming home." They sat together as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the rocks turn impossible shades of crimson and gold. James told her more about his life, his dreams. He wanted to buy land somewhere, he said, build a ranch like his father had, but do it right this time. Raise horses, maybe, good sturdy stock that could handle the rough country. Have a place that was truly his own. "Our own," Eleanor said, "if you want it to be." James pulled back to look at her. "Are you saying what I think you were saying?" "I am saying I want to stay with you. I do not care if it is scandalous or fast or makes no sense to anyone else. When I think about the future, you are in it. That is all I know for certain." James kissed her again, harder this time, with all the passion he had been holding back, When they broke apart, he was grinning like a fool. "Your uncle is going to shoot me," Eleanor laughed. "No, he will not. Uncle Thomas is a romantic. When he sees how happy we are, he will understand." They spent the evening talking about possibilities, about the future they might build together. James was practical, pointing out all the challenges they would face. Money was tight, and starting a ranch took capital they did not have. There would be people who disapproved of their relationship, who would make things difficult because of James's mixed heritage. The land itself was unforgiving, and many people failed at making a life in the territory. But Eleanor was undaunted. She had a small inheritance from her parents, she told him. Not a fortune, but enough to help them get started. And she was not afraid of hard work or of people's opinions. She had spent her whole life living by other people's rules, trying to fit into a mold that had never been right for her. For the first time, she wanted to make her own choices, build her own life. "Are you sure?" James asked her as they lay side by side under the stars, the fire burning low. "Once we do this, there is no going back. Your life in Philadelphia, all of that is finished." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "That life was never really mine. This is. You are." James pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had never felt so safe, so certain of anything. They made love that night under the vast New Mexico sky, slow and tender, learning each other with careful hands and whispered words. James was incredibly gentle with her, always mindful of her healing wrists, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bedroll, skin against skin, and Eleanor thought she had never been happier in her entire life. The next morning, they continued toward Silver City, but there was no urgency now. They stopped often, exploring side canyons and interesting rock formations. James taught her how to read tracks in the dust, showed her which plants were edible and which to avoid. Eleanor proved to be a quick study, asking questions and absorbing everything he told her. On the afternoon of the third day, they finally approached her uncle's ranch. The double T spread across a wide valley, green with late summer grass. Cattle dotted the landscape, sleek and healthy. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around three sides. Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves as they rode up the main drive. James must have sensed it because he reached over and squeezed her hand. "It will be all right," he said. "I promise." Thomas Hartwell came striding out of the house before they had even dismounted. He was a big man in his 60s with iron gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun. His expression was a mixture of relief and fury. "Eleanor!" He pulled her off her horse and into a crushing embrace. "Thank God you are safe. I have been half out of my mind with worry." "I am fine, Uncle Thomas," Eleanor gasped, struggling to breathe in his grip. "James found me. He saved my life." Thomas released her and turned to James, who had dismounted and stood waiting calmly. "Cordell, I will be forever in your debt. Name your price." "No price, sir," James said. "I did what any decent man would do." Thomas studied him for a long moment, his sharp eyes taking in everything. How close Eleanor stood to James, the way they looked at each other. A slow smile spread across his face. "I see," he said. "Well then, why do you not both come inside? My wife has been beside herself, and she will want to make sure Eleanor is truly all right. We have much to discuss." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Eleanor's aunt, a warm woman named Margaret, fussed over her injuries and insisted on tending to her wrists herself. Uncle Thomas took James aside for a private conversation that Eleanor was not privy to. She tried not to worry, but her stomach was in knots. When James and her uncle finally emerged from the study, both were smiling. Thomas clapped James on the shoulder like an old friend. "It is settled then," Thomas said. "Eleanor, your young man and I have come to an arrangement." "Arrangement?" Eleanor looked between them. James came to her, taking both her hands. "Your uncle has agreed to loan us the money to start our own ranch. I will work it off helping him with his herd, bringing in wild horses to break and train. In a year, maybe two, we will have our own place, our own future." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, not caring who saw. "Really? You mean it?" "I do," Thomas said, his eyes twinkling. "I was young once too, believe it or not. I recognize true love when I see it. And I would rather have Eleanor close by, even if she is married to a stubborn, half-breed cowboy, than back in Philadelphia with those stuffed shirt relatives." "Thank you, Uncle," Eleanor said, turning to hug him. "Thank you so much." "There is one condition," Thomas said, suddenly serious. "You two get properly married before you start living together. I will not have any scandal attached to my niece's name." "Of course," James said immediately. "I would not have it any other way. Eleanor deserves everything done right." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her make, and James stood beside her in new trousers and a pressed shirt, looking both nervous and happier than she had ever seen him. The local minister performed the ceremony, and a handful of ranch hands and neighboring ranchers attended. When James kissed her at the end of the ceremony, sealing their vows, Eleanor felt like her heart might burst with joy. This man, this incredible man who had saved her life and then given her a new one, was hers, and she was his, forever. They spent their first year living in a small cabin on Thomas's property while they worked to save money and build their own place. James proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly to bring in wild horses and train them. He had a gift for it, Eleanor discovered. Horses that were wild and skittish would calm under his patient hands. Within months, the Double T horses were known throughout the territory for their quality. Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She learned to cook for large crews of men, to tend sick animals, to help with branding and roundups. It was hard, exhausting work, so different from her life in Philadelphia, but she loved every minute of it. More than that, she loved building something with James, seeing their dream take shape little by little. At night in their small cabin, they would sit by the fire and plan their future, where exactly they would build their house, how many horses they wanted to start with, what they would name their ranch. James wanted to call it the Twin Springs after the 2 springs on the property they were purchasing. Eleanor loved the name. As the months passed, they fell more deeply in love. James was attentive and affectionate, always making sure Eleanor knew how much he valued her. He would bring her wildflowers he found on the range, or surprise her with a new book when he went to town. In return, Eleanor made their small cabin a real home, filling it with warmth and laughter. In the spring of 1879, they finally moved onto their own land. The house James built was not large, but it was sturdy and well-made, with a big fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley. They had 20 horses to start with, and James had already contracted to provide trained mounts to the army fort in the area. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in June. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be sure before telling James. When she finally did, sitting with him on the porch as the sun set, he was speechless with joy. "A baby," he kept saying over and over. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," James said. He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her like she was something infinitely precious. "You have given me everything, Eleanor, a home, a future, and now a family. I do not have the words for what that means to me." "You have given me the same," Eleanor said, framing his face with her hands. "You gave me my life back. You showed me what love really is." Their son was born in February of 1880, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's uncle, and James wept when he held his son for the first time. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Eleanor watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. This moment, this perfect moment, was everything she had never known she wanted. Her rough, gentle cowboy holding their child with such tenderness, the home they had built together, the life they were creating. Thomas Hartwell Sr. came to visit often, delighting in his great-nephew. He and James had become genuine friends despite their differences in age and background. Margaret doted on the baby, bringing gifts and offering advice that Eleanor was grateful for. The Twin Springs ranch prospered. James's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and soon they had more business than they could handle. Eleanor managed the accounts and correspondence, proving to have a sharp head for business. Together they built something remarkable. Their daughter was born 2 years later, in the spring of 1882. They named her Sarah, after James's mother. She had Eleanor's blonde hair and James's dark eyes, and she was spoiled rotten by her older brother, who took his role as protector very seriously even at age 2. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, times when money was tight and they worried about making ends meet. But they faced every challenge together, and somehow that made even the hard times feel manageable. They had each other, and that was enough. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James took Eleanor back to the canyon where they had first confessed their feelings for each other. They left the children with Margaret for the night and rode out together, just the two of them, like old times. The canyon was exactly as Eleanor remembered it, timeless and serene. They made camp by the spring, and as the sun set, turning the rocks those impossible shades of crimson and gold, James pulled her into his arms. 5 years, he said, feels like forever and like no time at all. I know what you mean, Eleanor said. She looked up at him, this man who had become her entire world. Do you ever regret it? Taking on a city girl who did not know the first thing about ranching? Not even for a second, James said firmly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Cordell. You and our children. I fall more in love with you every single day. Even when I burn the bread, Eleanor teased. Even then. Though maybe less so in that moment. He smiled, then grew serious. I was just existing before I found you. Going through the motions, but not really living. You changed everything. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, to put down roots. You made me believe I could have a real home, a real family. Eleanor blinked back tears. You did the same for me. I was so lost, James, so alone. And then you appeared in that shack, and it was like the sun coming out after years of darkness. You did not just save my life that day. You gave me a life worth living. They held each other as the stars emerged overhead. The same stars that had watched over them that first night. So much had changed since then, but the essential truth remained the same. They loved each other, completely and without reservation. That love had built a home, a family, a future. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses as much as his father, following James around the ranch and mimicking everything he did. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief. Eleanor had another son in 1885 whom they named William, and then twin girls in 1888, much to everyone's surprise and delight. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. By the early 1890s, Twin Springs was known throughout the territory for producing the finest horses west of the Mississippi. James had trained up several young cowboys in his methods, and they ran a respectable operation. Uncle Thomas passed away peacefully in 1892, leaving a significant portion of his estate to Eleanor and James. With that money, they were able to expand their holdings and help other young couples get started with ranches of their own. James never forgot how Thomas had given them their chance, and he wanted to pay that forward. Eleanor sometimes thought back to that terrified woman in the mining shack, her wrists raw and bleeding, certain she was going to die. She thought about how James had knelt beside her, his hands so gentle as he freed her and promised her safety. He had kept that promise, had given her so much more than just physical safety. He had given her a home in every sense of the word, a place to belong, a purpose, a family, love that was deep and true and lasting. On warm evenings when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, Eleanor and James would sit together on their porch and watch the sun set over the land they had built their life on. James would hold her hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her palm, just like he had that first night in the canyon. "Happy?" he would ask, though he knew the answer. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor would reply. "You?" "More than words can say." And it was true. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. Out of trauma and fear had come love and hope and a future brighter than either of them had dared to dream. The rope burns on Eleanor's wrists had long since healed, leaving only faint scars that she barely noticed anymore. But the gentleness with which James had wrapped those wounds, the promise of safety he had made that had never faded, it was the foundation of everything they had built together. Their children grew and had families of their own. Thomas took over the ranch eventually, running it with the same care and skill his father had. Sarah married a doctor and moved to Santa Fe, but visited often. William became a lawyer, fighting for the rights of Native peoples and mixed heritage families, carrying on his father's legacy in a different way. The twins, Emma and Rose, both stayed close to home, marrying local ranchers and raising their children within sight of the place their parents had built. James and Eleanor grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. He was still gentle with her, still protective, even when they were both gray-haired and moving slower. She still looked at him and felt that flutter in her chest, that certainty that he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, James stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. 50 years ago, I promised to keep her safe. I have done my best to keep that promise every day since, but what I did not know then was that she would keep me just as safe. She saved me just as much as I saved her. Eleanor, you are my heart, my home, my everything. Here is to 50 more years." The family cheered and laughed, knowing that 50 more years was unlikely, but appreciating the sentiment. Eleanor stood and kissed her husband, not caring that everyone was watching, just like that first kiss by the spring so many years ago. "I love you," she whispered against his lip, "my gentle cowboy, my hero, my home." "I love you," James whispered back. "Always have, always will." And that was the truth that had sustained them through 5 decades of life together. Love, simple and true and unshakable, built on a foundation of gentleness and trust, of promises kept and safety found. The girl with rope-burned wrists and the cowboy who had wrapped them with such care had built a love story that would be told in their family for generations to come. A testament to the fact that even in the hardest moments, even in the darkest times, love could bloom and flourish and last a lifetime. They lived out their days on the ranch they had built together, never regretting a single choice that had brought them to that life. And when they finally passed, many years later, they were laid to rest side by side on a hillside overlooking the valley, under the vast New Mexico sky they had both loved so much. Their children planted wildflowers on the grave, the same kind James used to bring Eleanor in those early days, and the Twin Springs Ranch continued to thrive, run by their descendants, a living legacy of the love between a frightened woman and the gentle cowboy who had saved her, who had promised her safety and given her so much more. He had given her a life, a love, and a home that lasted far beyond their years together, echoing through generations as a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, and that true love, once found, never really ends.